On the afternoon of May 31st, 1916, the North Sea witnessed a phenomenon that defied the physics of naval warfare. The Royal Navy, the undisputed master of the oceans, brought its supreme weapons to bear against the German high seas fleet. These were battlecruisers 20,000-ton leviathans, designed to project imperial power. But within minutes of the first engagement, they didn't just take damage, they ceased to exist. HMS Indefatigable, HMS Queen Mary, HMS Invincible. One by one, these steel mountains disintegrated in violent, catastrophic columns of smoke, vaporizing thousands of sailors in the span of a heartbeat. To the horrified observers on nearby vessels, it looked as if the ocean itself had erupted. This destruction was not the result of a new German superweapon or a lucky torpedo strike. The catastrophe originated from deep within the ships themselves, exposing a vulnerability so critical that it threatened to lose the war in a single afternoon. This is the story of the Battle of Jutland's battlecruisers and the catastrophic engineering flaw that sealed their fate. We will dissect how they were designed and why they failed. To understand why these ships vanished, we must first examine the strategic calculus that birthed them. The genesis of the disaster lies not in the North Sea, but on the drafting tables of the British Admiralty a decade earlier, driven by the singular vision of First Sea Lord John Fisher. Fisher revolutionized naval warfare with the HMS Dreadnought, but his true passion lay in a more radical concept, the battlecruiser. His design philosophy was encapsulated in a seductive, fatal maxim: speed is armor. The theory was elegant. A ship with superior speed could dictate the engagement, choosing the range at which to fight and outmaneuvering any slower opponent. If the enemy was too strong, the battlecruiser could simply run away. Consequently, Fisher's engineers made a calculated trade-off. To achieve high speeds of 25 knots or more while carrying heavy 12-inch or 13.5-inch main guns, weight had to be shed somewhere. That sacrifice was protection. When we compare the blueprints of a British battlecruiser like the Indefatigable against a contemporary German counterpart, the disparity in structural resilience is stark. The British vessel features a main armor belt just 6 inches thick, barely enough to stop a medium-caliber cruiser shell, and woefully inadequate against the heavy armor-piercing rounds of a capital ship. In contrast, the German design philosophy prioritized survivability, retaining thick vertical armor even on their faster ships. Fisher's ships were essentially eggshells armed with hammers. They were designed to hunt down smaller cruisers and raid commerce lines, tasks for which they were perfectly engineered. However, by 1916, the strategic reality had shifted. The Royal Navy needed every heavy gun available to counter the expanding German high seas fleet. As a result, these lightly armored greyhounds were deployed not as scouts, but as frontline combatants, placed at the vanguard of the battle line. They were asked to trade blows with heavily armored German dreadnoughts, a tactical situation they were never structurally designed to survive. But thin armor alone does not explain the sheer violence of their destruction. A ship with a pierced hull usually sinks slowly, listing and groaning as it takes on water. These ships did not sink. They detonated. The thin armor was merely the entry wound. The true cause of death lay waiting deep inside the hull, hidden within the complex machinery of the weapon systems themselves. To understand the mechanics of this disaster, we must look through the steel skin of the ship and focus on the barbette. This is the armored cylinder that houses the turret's rotating structure, extending from the gunhouse on deck deep down into the bowels of the ship. In a 3D cross-section, the turret assembly resembles a massive mechanical root system. At the very bottom, Well below the waterline sit the magazines. This is the heart of the danger. Here, tons of propellant are stacked in bins, waiting to be hoisted up to the guns.
The primary culprit in our forensic analysis
is the propellant itself.
MD.
Cordite MD.
Unlike modern high explosives that require a
detonator,
cordite is a deflagrating low explosive,
a mixture of nitroglycerin and gun cotton extruded into long, spaghetti-like rods.
Its job is to burn incredibly
creating
fast,
the gas pressure
creating
needed
the
to
gas
hurl
pressure needed to hurl a 1,200-pound
shell over 10 miles. The critical engineering flaw begins with how this cordite was packaged. The Royal Navy prioritized weight savings and handling speed. Consequently, the cordite rods were packed into quarter-charge bags made of raw silk.
Silk was chosen
because it burns away completely in the breach, leaving no residue. However, this meant the explosive was essentially naked. Compare this to the German system. The German high seas fleet used brass casings for their main propellant charges. A brass case is heavy and cumbersome, but it serves a vital dual purpose. It acts as a gas seal, or obturator, in the breach.
It protects the propellant from
external sparks or flashes during transport.
The British silk bags offered zero protection. If a
spark touched a silk bag, it wouldn't just smudge.
Let's trace the path of that propellant.
Instantly. Now, let's trace the path of that propellant. In the design of the British turret, the journey from magazine to gun breech was a complex, multi-stage relay. Choices were moved from the magazine into a handling gun, then placed onto a main hoist that lifted them to a working chamber.
Engineers were acutely aware that this vertical shaft was effectively a chimney.
Engineers were acutely aware that this vertical shaft was effectively a chimney,
the system was designed with a series of mechanical interlocks and flash-tight doors.
To prevent a catastrophe,
theoretically,
the system was designed with a series of mechanical
in the hoist
interlocks
was designed to remain
flash-tight doors. Theoretically, the system was fail-safe. A shutter in the hoist was designed to remain closed until the gun breech was sealed. Flaps between the handling room and the magazine were weighted to snap shut automatically. The design intent was to ensure that there was never a continuous open path from the gunhouse down to the magazine. The flame path was supposed to be physically broken by these steel barriers. However, this safety system came with a heavy operational tax: friction. Operating the interlocks, opening and closing the flash doors, and waiting for the hoists to cycle took time.
Presented a lethal paradox.
In the heat of battle, the complex hydraulic machinery could be slow and temperamental. The machine, therefore, presented a lethal paradox. It was engineered with safety features to prevent a flash fire, yet it was armed with naked, volatile propellant that demanded the utmost caution. And most dangerously, the entire apparatus was governed by a doctrine that demanded a rate of fire faster than the machinery could safely sustain.
The hardware was primed.
The hardware was primed.
All it needed was a spark.
All it needed was a spark. At 1548 GMT, the theoretical flaws of Fisher's design collided with the kinetic reality of high-velocity German steel. The engagement began as a running duel to the south, the British battlecruisers silhouetted against the light, making them perfect targets for the German optical rangefinders. The first domino to fall is HMS Indefatigable. Engaged by the German battlecruiser Von der Tann, she is struck by a salvo of 11-inch shells. Forensic reconstruction suggests that at least 2 shells strike the ship's rear quarter. One projectile impacts the roof of X turret, while another strikes the barbette armor. The 6-inch armor plating, designed only to deflect lighter rounds, shatters under the impact. The shell penetrates the interior of the turret structure and detonates. Inside the gunhouse, the explosion kills the gun crew instantly. But this is not what destroys the ship. The shell burst ignites the naked silk bags of cordite waiting in the ready-use racks. If we switch to a thermal X-ray view of the ship, we see the catastrophe unfold in slow motion. The cordite does not detonate immediately. It deflagrates.
A massive, pressurized fireball expands within the confined space of the turret. Physics dictates that this pressure must find an exit. It surges downwards, following the path of least resistance, the main ammunition hoist. Because the safety interlocks have failed or been bypassed, the Flash encounters no resistance. It roars down the trunk, passing from the gunhouse to the working chamber and finally into the handling room at the very bottom of the ship. There, it meets the magazine, the ship's primary fuel tank of destruction. In a fraction of a second, tons of propellant ignite simultaneously. The resulting overpressure blows the bottom out of the ship. Indefatigable rolls over and vanishes, taking 1,017 men with her. Less than 30 minutes later, the nightmare repeats itself. HMS Queen Mary, the pride of the fleet,
is trading blows with the SMS Derflinger. She takes a hit on Q turret, the midships turret located between the funnels. Again, the armor fails. Again, the Flash finds a conduit. Witnesses on the nearby HMS Tiger described a pillar of flame rising higher than the masts. The explosion is so violent that it breaks the ship's spine instantly. The forward section is pulverized, dragging the stern down with it. The 27,000-ton vessel disappears in under 2 minutes. The final act of this tragedy occurs later that evening, around 6:30 p.m. The flagship of the squadron, HMS Invincible, enters the fray. She is the oldest of the battlecruisers, the original prototype of the Flaw. A shell from Lutzow strikes the face of Q turret. The sequence is now horrifyingly predictable. The Flash travels down the hoist, bypassing the safety flaps, and ignites the midships magazine. The explosion shears the ship purely in half. The violence of the event is such that the bow and stern settle on the shallow bottom of the North Sea, standing vertically out of the water like twin tombstones. In all three cases, the forensic signature is identical. The ships were not battered into submission. They were hollowed out by their own ammunition. The enemy shell provided the spark, but the executioner was the flash of fire traveling down an open, unprotected throat, directly into the stomach of the beast. The question remains, why were the throats of these ships wide open? Why did the mechanical interlocks, designed specifically to stop this chain reaction, fail to close? The final verdict of our investigation reveals a disturbing truth. The loss of these three ships was not solely due to thin armor or volatile chemistry. The ultimate failure was human. Post-battle inquiries and survivors' testimonies uncovered a systemic violation of safety protocols that had become standard practice across the battlecruiser fleet. The Royal Navy's gunnery doctrine in 1916 was obsessed with one metric above all others: rate of fire. In the race to land the first hit, seconds mattered. Gun crews found that the mechanical safety interlock, the very systems designed to prevent a flash fire, were too slow. Waiting for a hoist to cycle or a flash door to seal cost precious time. To bypass these bottlenecks, crews were often ordered, or tacitly encouraged, to disable the safety mechanisms. Forensic analysis indicates that in the pursuit of speed, the flash-tight doors between the magazines and handling rooms were frequently left open or removed entirely. Worse, to ensure a rapid feed to the guns, crews stockpiled dozens of unprotected soaked cordite bags inside the turret and the handling rooms, stacking them against the bulkheads like firewood. By removing the choke points, the crews had inadvertently constructed a continuous, unbroken fuse of high explosives running from the enemy shell impact at the top straight down to the main magazine at the bottom. When the turret was hit, the flash didn't need to penetrate a complex series of doors. It simply leaped from one exposed bag to the next, racing down the hoist at the speed of sound. Admiral David Beatty, watching his squadron disintegrate from the bridge of the flagship Lion, famously remarked, "There seems to be something wrong with our bloody ships today." He was only half right. The ships were indeed brittle, built with a glass jaw philosophy, but the fatal blow was self-inflicted. In prioritizing the speed of the attack over the survivability of the machine, the Royal Navy had turned its own weapons into death traps. The flash fire didn't just find a weakness. The door was held open for it. The Battle of Jutland remains a stark lesson in the unforgiving calculus of naval engineering. It demonstrated that on the ocean, a weapon system is only as strong as its weakest safety protocol. The vanishing of the battlecruisers marked the end of the speed is armor era, leaving behind a chilling reminder that in the pursuit of ultimate lethality, one must never forget to protect the machine and the men who wield it.